From boardrooms to battlefields, from garages to global markets, this is Empires, a podcast about how great businesses are built, the risks their founders took, the corporate wars they fought, and the lessons they left behind. Welcome to the stories of modern empires. Welcome to episode 1. There's a company in Silicon Valley that has always felt more like a myth than a startup. It doesn't make the phone in your pocket. It doesn't run the social networks you scroll through. You've probably never touched its software. And yet, in its own way, Palantir has shaped wars, tracked terrorists, and even influenced how governments respond to pandemics. Some call it a savior. Others call it Big Brother. But one thing is certain. Palantir is an empire unlike any other. Today on Empires, we explore the rise of Palantir, how a secretive startup co-founded by Peter Thiel became one of the most controversial, powerful, and resilient companies in the world. Act 1. Origins, the Outsiders. The story begins in the early 2000s. The world had just changed forever. After September 11th, America's intelligence agencies were drowning in data, but still blind to threats. Phone records, passenger lists, financial transfers, surveillance footage, mountains of information. Analysts couldn't connect it. Clues slipped through the cracks. Peter Thiel, fresh from selling PayPal to eBay, saw an opportunity. At PayPal, his team had built software that detected fraud by finding strange patterns in oceans of transactions. Thiel asked a radical question: what if the same techniques could be used to fight terrorism? In 2003, he put up $30 million of his own money to fund a new venture. He gave it a name pulled from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, Palantir, after the mythical seeing stones that allowed their holders to perceive distant events and hidden truths. Thiel needed someone to run it. He chose Alex Karp, an unlikely CEO. Karp wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a hustling founder type. He was a philosophy PhD who had studied under the German thinker Jürgen Habermas. He had unruly curls, a restless mind, and a contrarian streak. He dressed differently. He thought differently. In Silicon Valley, where hoodies and growth hacking ruled, Karp seemed out of place, but Thiel believed Karp's outsider instincts would help Palantir chart its own path. Unlike most startups chasing fast growth, Palantir's target customer was unusual: the U.S. government. It partnered early with In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture arm, cementing ties with the intelligence community. And so, while Google promised to organize the world's information, Palantir promised something else: to weaponize it for national security. This was a radical bet. Selling to governments meant slow adoption, endless red tape, and secrecy. But it also meant power. If Palantir could pull it off, it would sit at the nerve center of intelligence, defense, and law enforcement. What Palantir does, the seeing stone. So what exactly does Palantir do? Imagine you're an analyst in 2004. You have dozens of databases, airline passenger lists, suspicious wire transfers, passport records, intercepted phone calls. Each one is isolated. Each one is incomplete. Palantir's software, later known as Gotham for government clients and Foundry for corporations, sits on top of that chaos. It connects the dots. It pulls threads together. It reveals networks, relationships, and anomalies you'd never see otherwise. It's not just about pretty charts. It's about turning raw, messy data into actionable decisions. Picture this. An analyst sees that one man bought a plane ticket in Hamburg, another wired $10,000 from Karachi, a third rented a car near Washington, D.C. On their own, each data point means little. Together, stitched by Palantir, they form a pattern. a possible terror cell preparing an attack. Or take Wall Street. Fraud investigators use Palantir to trace shell companies and hidden accounts. Or law enforcement, mapping gang networks. Or soldiers in Afghanistan, trying to understand which roadside bomb makers are connected to which financiers. Palantir doesn't sell ads. It doesn't chase clicks. Its only product is clarity, and clarity in a world of noise is priceless. Act 2. Building in the shadows. The early years were slow. Convincing the government to adopt new software was like convincing a glacier to dance. Bureaucracy, contracts, security clearances, every step took years. But Palantir persisted. Engineers embedded themselves with users, sitting side by side with analysts, soldiers, and investigators. They asked, "What's broken? How can this tool make your job easier?" This forward-deployed engineer model became Palantir's hallmark. Instead of selling software in a box, Palantir became a partner, tailoring its platform to each client. It was expensive. It didn't scale like Google, but it built loyalty. By the late 2000s, Palantir was used in Iraq and Afghanistan. Analysts credited it with helping track insurgent networks and save lives. It was reportedly involved in mapping the courier network that led to Osama bin Laden. At the same time, Palantir expanded into finance, helping banks comply with anti-money laundering laws. Hedge funds used it to spot suspicious trades. The empire was growing, but quietly. Unlike flashy startups raising headlines, Palantir avoided the spotlight. It didn't want to be the next Facebook. It wanted to be indispensable to the state. Act 3. The first fights. But empires are not built without battles. By the early 2010s, Palantir's reach triggered backlash. Civil liberties groups accused it of enabling mass surveillance. Critics pointed to its work with local police, saying it amplified racial profiling. Activists targeted its contracts with ICE, claiming Palantir's software facilitated aggressive deportations. Inside the company, Alex Karp responded defiantly. He said Palantir was built to defend Western democracies. He argued that refusing to work with governments would be irresponsible. He once told staff, "If you want to build a consumer app, don't work here. We work with the nation-states that defend liberty." But Palantir's fights weren't only political, they were corporate too. The U.S. Army resisted Palantir's software, preferring in-house systems. Palantir sued, accusing the Army of blocking fair competition. After a lengthy legal battle, a judge ruled in Palantir's favor, forcing the Army to consider its tools. It was a landmark victory, a startup beating the Pentagon at its own game. Palantir also clashed with investors. One backer, KT4 Partners, sued over lack of transparency. The company's secrecy made even insiders uneasy. And then there were competitors. Defense giants like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and Lockheed Martin. Palantir wasn't just fighting insurgents overseas, it was fighting entrenched empires at home. Yet with every battle, Palantir's legend grew. It was the rebel startup that sued the Army, defied Silicon Valley, and doubled down on controversial missions. Act 4. The controversial expansion. As Palantir grew, so did the controversy. On one side were governments and corporations that saw Palantir as indispensable. On the other side were critics who painted it as a surveillance machine wrapped in Silicon Valley clothing. The 2010s brought new contracts. Police departments in Los Angeles and New Orleans adopted Palantir to map crime networks. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, began using Palantir to track, arrest, and deport undocumented immigrants. For law enforcement, Palantir was a revelation. Officers could see who was connected to whom, which addresses were linked to which cars, which suspects popped up in multiple databases. Investigations that once took weeks could be done in hours. But for civil rights groups, this was a nightmare. They argued that Palantir enabled mass surveillance without accountability, that it made every data point in someone's life, a traffic ticket, a phone call, a utility bill, part of a searchable web that could be weaponized. Protests erupted. Palantir employees faced pressure from activists. At tech conferences, demonstrators disrupted Karp's speeches, accusing the company of building tools of oppression. Inside Palantir, debates raged. Some employees resigned. Others believed deeply in the mission. Karp stayed defiant. He argued that democracies needed strong tools to survive. He insisted Palantir would never sell to authoritarian regimes like China or Russia. Working with the West, he believed, was not just business, it was moral duty. Palantir, in his view, was a shield for free societies. A different kind of Silicon Valley company. By this time, Palantir had become an anomaly in Silicon Valley. Other companies chased scale, billions of users, advertising revenue, viral growth. Palantir chased government contracts. Other companies wanted consumer love. Palantir wanted state power. Its culture was unique. Engineers were forward deployed, embedding directly with clients. Instead of coding from a San Francisco loft, they sat in military bases, police stations, and government offices, tailoring the software in real time. This intimacy created loyalty, but it also created distance from the rest of the valley. Palantir wasn't admired like Google or adored like Apple. It was feared, mistrusted, and sometimes hated, and Palantir leaned into that identity. It wasn't a consumer brand, it was a weapon in the shadows. The lawsuit against the Army. One of Palantir's defining battles came against its most important client, the U.S. Army. For years, the Army had resisted using Palantir. Bureaucrats favored their own in-house system, DCGSA, a clunky, expensive platform that many soldiers disliked. Palantir believed it could do better. In 2016, Palantir sued the Army under a federal law requiring the government to consider commercial alternatives before building its own systems. It was a bold move, a startup taking the Army to court, and it worked. A federal judge ruled in Palantir's favor. The Army was forced to consider Palantir's software for future programs. It was a stunning victory, proof that even the Pentagon could be forced to adopt innovation. This lawsuit was more than a contract dispute. It was a declaration. Palantir would not play by the usual rules. It would fight for its empire, even if it meant challenging the most powerful military on Earth. Act 5. The Road to IPO. For most of its life, Palantir remained private. Rumors swirled about its size, revenue, and profitability. Some called it a decacorn, worth tens of billions. Others doubted it would ever go public. Alex Karp fueled the mystery. He railed against Silicon Valley culture, saying Palantir would never fit in. He resisted Wall Street's obsession with quarterly results. But eventually the pressure grew. By the late 2000s, investors wanted liquidity. Employees wanted stock they could sell. Palantir needed capital for its next chapter. In September 2020, Palantir finally went public. But in true Palantir fashion, it did so unconventionally, through a direct listing, bypassing the traditional IPO roadshow. Karp marked the occasion with a letter to investors declaring, "Our company was founded in a time of deep concern. We built software that enables the West to prevail, and we will continue to stand with the nations and institutions that defend liberty. It wasn't the usual Wall Street pitch. It was half manifesto, half warning. On its first day of trading, Palantir was valued at more than $20 billion. Its empire was now exposed to public scrutiny. Act 6, a pandemic opportunity. Palantir's IPO came at a moment of global crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. Governments scrambled to track infections, manage hospital capacity, and distribute vaccines. Suddenly, data integration wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Palantir seized the moment. Its Foundry platform was deployed across the UK and the US, helping public health officials monitor outbreaks, predict shortages, and plan logistics. For the first time, Palantir wasn't just a counter-terrorism company. It was a public health company. It was a logistics company. It was everywhere. The pandemic became proof of concept. Palantir showed it could serve not only militaries and intelligence agencies, but also healthcare, energy, and manufacturing. Airbus used it to manage supply chains. BP used it to run oil operations. Hospitals used it to allocate resources. What had started as a secretive counterterrorism tool had become a quiet operating system for the modern world. The transformation. By 2021, Palantir had two major products: Gotham, its flagship for governments and intelligence, and Foundry, its platform for commercial clients. Together, they represented Palantir's dual identity: half warrior, half builder. Gotham helped track terrorists. Foundry helped track vaccines. Gotham mapped insurgents. Foundry mapped supply chains. This dual identity made Palantir hard to categorize. Was it a defense contractor, a tech startup, a data company, a software platform? The answer was all of the above. For critics, this was dangerous. A company so deeply embedded in both governments and corporations, with so much influence over sensitive data, seemed like a risk to democracy itself. For supporters, it was genius. Palantir had carved out a space no one else could match, a space where national security, corporate intelligence, and global logistics converged. Palantir had gone from outsider to indispensable. Act 7. The Empire Today. Palantir today is unlike any other tech company. It doesn't measure success by downloads or likes or subscribers. It measures success in contracts with the Pentagon, with NATO, with intelligence agencies, and with Fortune 500 companies. Its two products, Gotham and Foundry, are the backbone of its empire. Gotham powers the defense and intelligence world. Foundry runs corporate operations. Together, they are Palantir's dual crown. In 2021, Palantir reported billions in revenue and contracts stretching from governments to multinationals. Its valuation soared into the tens of billions. For a company once dismissed as a secretive oddity, it was now a global powerhouse. But with power came even sharper controversy. Palantir and Ukraine. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. The world watched in shock as missiles struck Kyiv, as tanks rolled across the border, as cities were reduced to rubble. Behind the scenes, Ukraine turned to Palantir. The company provided its software to help Ukraine's government integrate data from drones, satellites, and battlefield reports. Palantir's tools helped identify targets, coordinate logistics, and predict enemy movements. Alex Karp himself traveled to Kyiv, meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky. He declared publicly that Palantir stood with Ukraine, calling it a fight for the future of democracy. For supporters, this was proof of Palantir's value. A Silicon Valley company directly helping a small nation defend itself against one of the world's largest militaries. For critics, it was chilling. A private company with unelected leaders was now helping shape the battlefield of a war. Decisions once reserved for governments were now in the hands of engineers and executives. Palantir once again blurred the line between business and geopolitics. Karp, the philosopher king. At the center of this empire stands Alex Karp. In a world of polished CEOs and investor-friendly soundbites, Karp is an anomaly. He is eccentric, verbose, combative. He wears colorful ski jackets to board meetings. He speaks in philosophical tangents. He rails against both big tech and Wall Street, even while running a multi-billion-dollar public company. He once described Palantir as a mission-driven company built to defend the West. He has said bluntly that Palantir will never work with adversaries like China or Russia, even if it means losing money. Karp's leadership style is divisive. Some employees see him as inspiring, others as erratic, but his contrarianism has shaped Palantir's identity. He has kept it separate from Silicon Valley's culture of social media platforms and consumer apps. He has positioned it not as a unicorn startup, but as a civilizational project, a company whose destiny is tied to the survival of Western democracies. And he has built an empire that reflects that vision, the AI frontier. By the mid-2020s, artificial intelligence became the new frontier of technology. Startups and giants alike promised that AI would transform everything from medicine to marketing. Palantir entered the race differently. It didn't build chatbots or photo filters. Instead, it integrated AI into Gotham Foundry, promising to give governments and corporations predictive superpowers. Imagine a commander not only seeing where enemy forces are today, but where they will be tomorrow. Imagine a hospital administrator not only knowing how many beds are occupied now, but predicting exactly when and where new patients will arrive. This was Palantir's pitch. AI not as a consumer novelty, but as a battlefield tool, a logistics weapon, an empire's crystal ball. It branded its new product the Artificial Intelligence Platform, or AIP, and once again, governments lined up. Act 8. The critics. But empires are always contested. For every supporter who sees Palantir as a defender of freedom, there is a critic who sees it as a threat to liberty. Civil liberties groups warn that Palantir enables mass surveillance, that its tools allow governments to see too much, know too much, and act with too little oversight. Privacy advocates argue that once data is centralized and searchable, abuse is inevitable. That what begins as counterterrorism always bleeds into domestic policing, immigration enforcement, and political control. Even in Silicon Valley, Palantir is often shunned. Tech workers who celebrate Apple's design or Google's innovation speak about Palantir in whispers. It is the company many engineers refuse to join, fearing their work will be used in ways they cannot support. Alex Karp dismisses these critics. He argues that democracies are safer with Palantir than without it. He insists the company works only with allies of the West. He positions Palantir as a guardian, not a villain. But the truth is murkier. Palantir's software is powerful, and power, once unleashed, is difficult to contain. Palantir and the markets. On Wall Street, Palantir has had a turbulent ride. Its stock soared after its IPO, then slumped, then recovered. Investors debate whether Palantir is a software company or a defense contractor, whether it can scale like a tech giant or whether it will remain a niche player. Analysts complain about its reliance on government contracts. Bulls argue that its commercial growth through Foundry proves it can expand beyond defense. Through it all, Palantir remains defiant. It doesn't chase quarterly hype. It doesn't optimize for Wall Street's expectations. It insists on its mission to be indispensable, even if misunderstood. And that perhaps is the essence of Palantir's empire. Powerful, secretive, controversial, enduring. Act 9. The Global Ambitions. Palantir today is not just an American company, it is global. Its headquarters remain in Denver, Colorado, but its influence stretches across Europe, Asia, and beyond. The company has contracts with the United Kingdom's National Health Service, with France's Defense Ministry, with Germany's police, with NATO as a whole. It has positioned itself as the operating system of Western democracies. If you are a government trying to manage data, whether in defense, intelligence, healthcare, or logistics, Palantir wants to be your platform. But expansion is never easy. In Europe, privacy laws are stricter. Regulators worry about data concentration. Politicians debate whether depending on an American company for sensitive national systems is wise. Palantir insists it respects local laws. It insists it builds systems that enhance accountability, not diminish it. But the questions persist. How much should societies rely on one company for decisions that affect millions of lives? The corporate empire. Beyond governments, Palantir has moved aggressively into the corporate world. Airbus uses Palantir to manage aircraft production. BP uses it to optimize energy operations. Pharmaceutical companies use it to run drug trials. Manufacturers use it to track supply chains. Here, Palantir's pitch is simple. Every company is drowning in data. Foundry makes sense of it. Executives who adopt Palantir often speak of it in glowing terms. They say it transforms how decisions are made, how operations are run. They say it uncovers efficiencies worth billions. But there's a catch. Palantir is not cheap. Its model is high touch, with engineers embedding deeply into client organizations. For some, this makes it indispensable. For others, it makes it expensive and slow to scale. Wall Street still debates, can Palantir ever grow like Microsoft or Amazon? Or will it remain a specialized empire, powerful but limited? The ethical dilemmas. At the heart of Palantir's story is an ethical question. What happens when a private company becomes the gatekeeper of knowledge? Governments now depend on Palantir to fight wars, track pandemics, and manage infrastructure. Corporations depend on it to run operations. But Palantir is not accountable to voters. Its executives are not elected. Its board is not subject to public oversight. Alex Karp insists that Palantir makes societies safer. He argues that refusing to build such tools would leave democracies vulnerable. But critics warn that concentrating so much power in one company's hands is dangerous, no matter the intentions. This tension defines Palantir's empire. It is both admired and feared, embraced and rejected. It is both savior and villain, depending on who you ask. The culture of secrecy. Palantir's culture only adds to the mystique. Unlike most tech companies, it does not chase publicity. It rarely markets its products. It operates in shadows, often refusing to name clients. Its contracts are cloaked in secrecy, its deployments hidden from view. For employees, this culture can be intoxicating. Working at Palantir feels like being part of a secret mission, like serving a cause larger than profit. But secrecy also breeds suspicion. When people don't know what a company does, They imagine the worst. And Palantir has done little to ease those fears. This has been both its strength and its weakness. The myth of Palantir has fueled its reputation, but the same myth has made it a target. Act X, The Lessons of Empire. Looking at Palantir's journey, certain patterns emerge. First, empires are built not by following trends, but by defying them. In an era when every startup chased consumers, Palantir chased governments. It went where no one else wanted to go. Second, empires require battles. Palantir fought regulators, critics, investors, and even the U.S. Army. Every empire faces resistance. The question is whether it can survive the struggle. Third, empires are defined by vision. Palantir was not just software. It was a philosophy that democracies need powerful tools to defend themselves, and that one company could provide them. These lessons echo through history. Rome expanded not because it followed the crowd, but because it built systems no one else could match. The British Empire thrived on global logistics. Palantir thrives on data. Empires are different in form, but not in function. The fragility of power. Yet every empire is fragile. Palantir's reliance on government contracts leaves it vulnerable to politics. A change in administration, a shift in regulation, a backlash over privacy, any of these could weaken its position. Its high-cost model limits its growth. Its controversies alienate potential allies. Its culture of secrecy keeps it isolated from mainstream tech. And history shows that empires rarely last forever. They rise, they dominate, they face resistance, and eventually they decline. The question for Palantir is whether it can reinvent itself fast enough to outlast the cycle. Act 11. The Futures of Palantir. What comes next for Palantir? There are several possible futures, each with its own risks and rewards. In one scenario, Palantir becomes the indispensable backbone of Western defense and industry. Its platforms expand across governments and corporations, embedding so deeply that removing them becomes impossible. Just as Microsoft became unavoidable in offices, Palantir becomes unavoidable in decision-making. In another scenario, Palantir's empire fractures under pressure. Political backlash over surveillance grows too strong. European regulators restrict its reach. Competitors catch up with cheaper, more scalable solutions. The empire once feared becomes just another contractor. And then there is the most intriguing possibility. Palantir evolves into something even bigger, a civilizational infrastructure company. Not a defense contractor, not a software startup, but the silent operating system for modern societies. Healthcare, energy, finance, defense, logistics, all running on Palantir. Which of these futures unfolds will depend not just on Palantir's technology, but on how the world chooses to use it. The Empire Lens. When we talk about empires, we often think of ancient Rome, or Britain at its height, or the rise of America in the 20th century. But business empires share the same DNA. They begin with vision. They expand through battles. They rise by providing something others cannot. And they are always contested, always fragile. Apple built its empire on design and control. Microsoft built on licensing and ubiquity. NVIDIA is building one today on chips and artificial intelligence. Reliance in India built on scale, integration, and the ability to pivot from energy to telecom to retail. And Palantir? Palantir built its empire on secrecy and power, on being willing to serve clients that others avoided, on turning the chaos of data into the clarity of action. Like the empires of history, it thrives because others depend on it. Like the empires of history, it will be judged not only on what it builds, but on what it destroys. The paradox of Palantir. The paradox of Palantir is this. It is one of the most powerful companies in the world, and yet most people have never used its products. It has influenced wars and pandemics, but its name is barely recognized outside of tech and politics. It is essential and invisible at the same time, and perhaps that is the ultimate mark of its empire. True power is not in being seen, it is in being unavoidable, even when hidden. Palantir is not Apple. It doesn't live in your pocket. It is not Microsoft, powering every spreadsheet and email. It is not Google, organizing the world's information for free. It is something else, something stranger, something more unsettling. It is an empire built in shadows, an empire forged in secrecy and sustained by controversy, an empire that defies Silicon Valley's rules and Wall Street's expectations. Some will see it as a guardian of freedom, others will see it as a danger to liberty. Both may be right, but one thing is certain. Palantir has changed how empires are built in the modern age, not by conquering land or dominating consumers, but by controlling the most valuable resource of all, knowledge. And like all empires, its future is uncertain. It may rise higher still. It may collapse under its own weight, but the mark it has left will endure. Because empires are not always visible. Sometimes the most powerful ones are the ones you barely notice, until you realize they've shaped the world you live in. This has been Empires Episode 1, Palantir, a story of vision, secrecy, controversy, and power. A story of how a handful of outsiders built one of the most mysterious and consequential companies of our time. Join us next time as we explore another empire that rose from humble beginnings to global dominance. Because behind every empire there is a story, and behind every story there is a lesson.